a pressurized tube 7 miles up, slicing through thin air at 500 miles an hour. Everything looks normal. The autopilot is steady. The instruments are calm. The radio is quiet. And then, slowly, the silence starts to feel wrong. This is the story of ghost flights, when modern jets keep flying almost perfectly, while no one on board is able to answer a call. Today, we're going to break down how that's possible, why it has happened before, and what the most famous cases can teach us. We'll stay close to physics, systems, and public facts. And we'll separate what the evidence can support from myths that refuse to die. Some scenes you're imagining as you listen will be reenactments. They're meant to illustrate what experts think likely happened. They are not proof by themselves. They're a way to see the data we do have. Let's begin with a simple promise. In the next 20 minutes, you'll understand how pressurization works in a jet. You'll know what hypoxia does to the human body at cruising altitude. You'll learn what autopilot can do brilliantly and what it can't do at all. We'll walk through 2 real incidents that define the term ghost flight. And we'll close with what these patterns do and do not explain, even when the internet is certain. Start with air. Not the air you're breathing now, but the air inside a jet. Outside the airplane at 35 to 41,000 feet, the air is too thin to support human life without additional oxygen. The solution is simple in principle and complex in engineering. Jets take compressed air from the engines, route it through environmental control systems, and maintain a comfortable pressure inside the cabin. It's why your ears pop on climb and descent. It's why you can sit and read and talk and forget that on the other side of a thin aluminum wall is a near vacuum. Inside the cockpit, a pressurization controller is set before takeoff. It knows the cruise altitude and the landing field elevation, and it schedules the cabin to climb and descend gently. If everything is configured correctly, you never notice any of this. But if it isn't, or if a component fails, cabin pressure can begin to fall. When it falls fast, the crew has to act immediately. They have to don their oxygen masks. They have to descend to a breathable altitude. And they have to do it within a shockingly short window. A phrase you need to know is useful consciousness. It is not the moment you pass out. It is the shorter window in which your brain can still make decisions. At 35,000 feet, useful consciousness might be 30 to 60 seconds. At 41,000, it can be less than 30 seconds. The symptoms are subtle at first. Warmth, euphoria, slower thinking, tunnel vision, a feeling that you're fine. That's the trap. By the time you realize something is wrong, you may not have the clarity to fix it. You may not even have the will to put on the mask that's within arm's reach. Automation complicates and saves in the same breath. Autopilot was built to fly the airplane more precisely than any human can for long stretches. It holds altitude. It maintains heading. It can track navigation routes and fly holding patterns. It can even fly an autoland in very specific conditions near the runway, when the crew has set it up and the airport and aircraft are certified to do it. But autopilot is not a mind. It is not a pilot. It doesn't diagnose a pressurization issue. It doesn't declare an emergency. It doesn't talk to air traffic control. It doesn't descend unless a human tells it to, or unless the airplane loses thrust and can't hold altitude any longer. Now, imagine a flight where cabin pressure begins to fall. The warning chimes. The crew needs to act fast. If they do, the masks go on, the airplane descends, and a stressful event becomes an incident handled by procedure. If they don't, or if confusion or misset switches delay that action, hypoxia creeps in. In a minute, the crew might not be able to think clearly enough to fix anything. Autopilot continues flying exactly as it was told earlier. It will cruise along for hours, as long as there is fuel. To anyone watching a radar scope, the target looks normal, until it doesn't. This is not hypothetical. It has happened before, and one of the most well-known cases began over Florida on a clear morning in October 1999. A Learjet business jet carrying professional golfer Payne Stewart departed Orlando, Florida, bound for Dallas. The takeoff looked routine. The jet climbed and turned on course. Then radio calls to the cockpit went unanswered. Controllers kept trying. Not unusual at first. Frequency changes get missed. But as minutes passed, the silence became its own kind of radio call. Fighters were sent to intercept and observe. They pulled alongside at high altitude, formation flying with the white jet that held perfect cruise, straight and level. What they saw inside has been reported in public summaries. No visible movement. Frost on some windows. The business jet continued north, then northwest, for hours. The autopilot did its job with eerie perfection. When fuel ran out, the engines flamed out. Without thrust, the jet could no longer hold altitude. It descended out of control and impacted terrain in South Dakota. The investigation pointed to a probable pressurization problem and crew incapacitation. The system failed. The crew was overcome. The autopilot sustained an illusion of normal flight until physics took back control. The lesson of that day is not mysterious. It is the chain. A small failure can set up a larger one. A warning missed becomes a condition that robs you of the ability to respond. Automation keeps the airplane stable and on course, which reduces chaos in the sky, but also hides the human emergency on board. Ghost flights are not paranormal events. They are the rare intersection of engineering, physiology, and timing. 6 years later, a different airline, a different airplane, and a different set of circumstances drew a disturbingly familiar shape in the sky. In August 2005, a Boeing 737 type aircraft departed Larnaca, Cyprus, on a short flight to Athens. A pressurization control was reportedly left in the wrong mode after maintenance and checks. The airplane took off, climbed, and the cabin pressure did not respond as intended. Oxygen levels dropped. Masks deployed. The crew spoke on the radio, but transmissions became confused. The aircraft continued to climb. Automation flew the programmed route. The cabin environment, however, made meaningful human action harder with every second. Over Greece, fighter jets intercepted. They saw oxygen masks in the cabin. They reported movement at one point, and a person later identified as a cabin crew member on supplemental oxygen attempting to reach the controls. It was a heroic effort in a deteriorating situation. But fuel is a limit that cannot be negotiated. The airplane could not maintain flight forever. When the tanks ran dry, the aircraft descended and crashed. The official findings emphasized pressurization configuration, human factors, and the cruel speed of hypoxia. What connects these two events is not the make of airplane or the airline name. It's the shape of the data, the silence on the radio, the sustained cruise altitude, the steady ground track, the eventual end as fuel exhaustion removes the power that had kept the illusion going. If you plot the track on a map, it looks almost boringly stable, and then it simply ends. That is how many ghost flights end, not with a wild maneuver, but with a slow surrender to gravity after hours of normal-looking flight. So what, specifically, can Autopilot do in scenarios like these? It can hold altitude and heading within tight tolerances. It can track a lateral path, like an airway or a GPS course, and follow it accurately. It can descend if told to descend. It can fly a holding pattern near a waypoint, circling neatly for as long as fuel allows. In some aircraft, and at some airports, under certified conditions with everything set up in advance, it can guide the airplane to touchdown on a specific approach. But it does not decide to attempt a landing. It does not declare an emergency. It does not coordinate with controllers. It does not put on oxygen masks. Those are human actions. Imagine you're a controller now, watching a target that should be talking but isn't. You can see altitude, you can see speed, you can see the beacon code, at least until a transponder goes offline or stops updating. What you cannot see is the smell of ozone in a cockpit. You cannot see the color leaving someone's face. You cannot feel the warm lie of hypoxia telling you you're fine. If the aircraft remains in controlled flight, if it's not barreling toward a major city, the safest immediate choice is often to monitor, to intercept if possible, and to plan for what fuel exhaustion will do when it arrives. Search teams inherit data like this when an unresponsive flight ends far from land. They're given radar traces, if available. They're given any satellite handshakes that can confirm an airplane was powered on and exchanging routine pings. They model winds aloft. They model fuel burn based on altitude and power. They examine how an aircraft without thrust will behave at the end. Does it glide? Does it descend steeply? Do the wings remain level? Each assumption changes the size and shape of the search area. The ocean is huge. The signals are few. The window narrows, but it doesn't vanish. The idea that automation will just land the plane is one of those myths that sticks because it's comforting. Modern jets do have impressive auto-land capabilities, but auto-land is a tightly controlled operation near the runway environment. It requires specific equipment on the ground and on the airplane, a specific approach, and a crew that has set everything correctly. It is not a magical button you can press at cruise to take you from 400 miles away to a gentle arrival. If the crew is incapacitated at altitude, the airplane will stay where it was told to stay, until fuel and gravity rewrite the plan. Another myth is that oxygen masks give you lots of time. Masks help if you put them on immediately, but the time to get them on is measured in seconds. The time to decide to descend is measured in seconds. The time to interpret a warning correctly is measured in seconds. Once hypoxia takes your judgment and your fine motor control, the mask that would save you becomes a foot farther away than you can reach. A third myth is that air traffic control can control an airplane that's not answering. Controllers can see, they can call, they can vector other airplanes, they can request an intercept. They cannot move the throttles or push a button on the autopilot from the ground. If no one responds in the cockpit, the airplane continues doing whatever it was already told to do. When a ghost flight happens, it tests the edges of aviation's layered safety. The systems that keep us safe most days can mask an emergency on some days. Autopilot holds stability, which is usually good, but it also prevents the dramatic movements that would alert everyone to a problem instantly. Pressurization makes the cabin safe, until it fails silently enough that the people who need to act don't act fast enough. Procedures are designed to keep these chains from forming, and they usually do. But the occasional tragedy reminds us that humans, under stress and time pressure, in a complex environment, can miss the one switch that matters. Two ideas are important here. First, ghost flights do not require elaborate conspiracies to explain their core behavior. Physics, systems, and human factors can draw the same pattern again and again. Second, those same patterns don't explain everything. They don't tell you why a specific pressurization issue began on a specific day. They don't tell you what attempts were made in a particular cockpit. They don't tell you where every piece ended up after an impact far from land. Evidence narrows the possibilities. It doesn't always produce a full cinematic answer. Imagine being a family member, standing in front of an ocean as the wind picks up. The questions aren't abstract to you. They're names and voices and the last text message you sent. The science matters. The search matters. But so does the acknowledgement that uncertainty hurts. Explaining ghost flights well means staying human. It means remembering that a tidy theory is not a comfort if it erases the people who lived and worked and loved before they became a statistic on a flight plan. So, what should you remember from this? Pressurization keeps you alive. If it fails or is misconfigured, the window to act is short. Hypoxia is deceptive. It feels like warmth and calm. Autopilot is faithful. It will keep doing exactly what it was told, long after the people who told it are no longer able to intervene. That's why some jets, on some days, have flown hundreds of miles with no one answering the radio. And it's why those same jets, when the tanks run dry, end the way physics says they must. Search teams don't give up because the odds are long. They don't guess. They narrow. They redraw the maps with each new piece of data. Fuel at altitude, wind speed, any satellite handshake, debris that washes ashore weeks or months later, drift models that backtrack where a floating fragment could have started. The ocean hides, but it also reveals, slowly. Every arrow on a drift chart is a possibility. Every sonar pass is a question. Is there a shape here that does not belong? The answer is sometimes no, for months at a time. And then, rarely, the answer is yes. There's another reason to study ghost flights. They clarify what automation is and isn't. There's a useful humility that comes from admitting that even the most advanced autopilot is a tool, not a pilot. It makes the airplane easier to fly. It reduces workload. It extends safety margins. It lets crews manage weather, traffic, and fuel with more brain space for decisions. But when the critical moment arrives, when a mask needs to go on, when a descent needs to start, automation is a passenger. It waits for instructions. If none arrive, it does not panic. It does not improvise. It simply holds the last plan until the laws of nature end the flight. It's fair to ask why crews can miss something so urgent. The answer is complicated, and it's not about competence. It's about workload, noise, and the human brain. A warning can be misinterpreted because a different warning sounded first. A switch can be left in the wrong position because night shift maintenance used a checklist that ended one line earlier than usual. A training memory can misfire under stress. None of this excuses outcomes, but it recognizes that aviation safety is a mosaic of people and processes that mostly catch errors before they matter. When they don't, investigations should be about learning, not blame alone. That learning shapes procedures. It shapes checklists that now say, in bold, masks on first. It shapes training scenarios that make crews practice high-altitude descents until it's muscle memory. It shapes maintenance sign-offs that require an extra pair of eyes. It shapes how controllers respond to silence. It shapes the way search data is archived and shared. The goal is not perfection. The goal is resilience. When something slips, another layer catches it. When we talk about ghost flights, it's tempting to imagine a kind of mythology. Empty cockpits flying themselves, planes with a will. But the reality is both stranger and simpler. The airplane is doing exactly what it was told to do when people were healthy, and the plan made sense. It has no sense that circumstances changed. It follows the path and the altitude and the speed. It turns where it was instructed to turn. It holds where it was told to hold. It is, in a literal sense, mindless. That's why these stories disturb us. They're not about haunted machines. They're about how thin the line can be between control and helplessness when time and oxygen run out. If you've ever flown and felt a little apprehension at cruising altitudes, here's the part that should bring you back to Earth. Aviation is safe because it's obsessive. Because after every incident, the people who care about this craft take a microscope to procedures and training and design. They patch holes. They rewrite checklists. They redesign alerts. They teach again. Ghost flights are a reason to look hard at how we set up crews for success in the first minute of a problem, not the last hour of it. They are a reason to remember that clear thinking is a resource like fuel, and it can run out fast if you don't secure it first. Now, step back with me to the cockpit we imagined at the start. The airplane is high. The air is thin. A chime sounds. The pressurization indicator is not where it should be. The right move, drilled and drilled and drilled, is simple and urgent. Masks on. Establish oxygen. Start down. Only then, troubleshoot. In that order. Every second counts, because every second you wait is a second where your brain is losing the very ability to decide. Down in the cabin, a passenger notices nothing for a while. The pressure change is slow at first. A yawn, another. Someone pulls a blanket higher and watches a movie. If masks drop, it's startling. But the message is clear. Put it on, breathe. Wait for the descent. Most people will be okay. The danger zone is where decisions are made, not where instructions are followed. On the ground, the radar scope ticks. A small green return moves steadily along an airway line. There is comfort in that steadiness. That comfort can be a trick, because steadiness says nothing about the conversations not happening, or the button not pressed. It says nothing about the way a warning tone sounds too similar to a different one, or how a pilot might be reaching for a switch in thick gloves and missing by an inch as the world slows and narrows. When these stories end badly, we're left with fragments, metal and composites, data points on a screen, intercept reports, a radio call that was almost clear and then wasn't. It's normal to want a cleaner ending. It's normal to search for a single villain. But in aviation, the answer is almost always a chain. If you break one link in time, the chain falls apart. If you don't, the chain becomes the story. There is dignity in not pretending we know the parts we do not know. There is also dignity in repeating the parts we do know, because they save lives. Don your mask first. Descend. Teach crews to treat hypoxia as a clock, not a mood. Teach controllers how to respond to silence with procedures that keep other airplanes clear and buy time for intercepts. Teach search teams to keep refining models so that each square mile at sea is not just a guess, but a reasoned next step. Ghost flights are not common. That's important to say. Millions of flights happen every year without incident. Crews make smart decisions under pressure. Technology works. When it doesn't, the system learns. The purpose of this episode is not to frighten you. It's to replace a myth with a mechanism. To swap the story that airplanes become haunted with the sober knowledge that automation can hide a human emergency. And that time is the resource that matters most. If you've listened this far, you're part of that learning. You'll hear a news alert differently now. You'll know that Autopilot is not a character in the story. It's a verb. You'll know that oxygen is invisible until it isn't. You'll know that a steady track on radar means stability, not safety. And you'll know that the people who fly your plane are trained intensely to win a race against a ticking clock long before the rest of us realize there ever was a race. As we close, hold two truths at once. First, the mechanisms behind ghost flights are understood well enough to teach, to train, and to prevent. Second, the specifics of any single event may remain partly unknowable because the people we most want to hear from are not here to tell us. That doesn't make the effort to understand less valuable. It makes it more urgent because it honors them. If this episode helped you see the shape of these stories more clearly, there's more to explore. Remember what matters most at altitude: air to breathe, time to think, a plan practiced until it's a reflex, and the humility to say, when we don't know, that we don't know. For the families and crews and responders who live with complicated endings, we keep learning so fewer stories end this way. And for the rest of us, we keep listening so that when it matters, the first step is the right one, taken in time. Ghost flights aren't magic. They're physics and procedure, and sometimes the absence of both. They're a reminder that the difference between ordinary and impossible can be measured in seconds, and that the simplest checklist item, mask on, can be the hinge on which an entire day turns. Thank you for watching and for caring about the details. If you have questions, ask them. If you've heard a claim that sounds too neat, bring it to us. We'll keep following the evidence, we'll keep marking speculation as speculation, and we'll keep giving the microphone to the facts, even when the facts are quieter than the noise. This has been Unsolved Plus. Stay curious, stay kind to the people who don't have answers yet, and we'll see you in the next one.